You're a former Commerce Secretary. What does this look like? You get this order from the president to make some pretty historic decisions and put them into action. How does this work?
Well, this is a very big deal. People are talking about whether we're going to be in a trade war, whether a trade war is coming. Make no doubt, the trade war is here. We are in a trade war. And I'm surprised that it's taken the market so long to recognize that. But, this has started, and it's going to continue. We have the tariffs on aluminum and steel. The 301 tariffs will be announced, specifically will be put in place on July the 6th. So that is another key date. But we are into this. This has started. And I think we need to be thinking about how do you get out of a war, a trade war, once you start it.
And so how would you get out of it? Let's go right there. What would you do?
Well, there are a couple scenarios, but I doubt if we're going to see a surrender ceremony where someone signs away their trade policy. I believe that there needs to be a discussion about how different systems can coexist. We have a different system than China, a lot of similarities, but there is a difference in how they approach the economy. I think we're going to have to figure out a way of coexisting in harmony together in the future, instead of trying to make China look like the U.S. or the U.S. look like China. That's going to be the big challenge. And ironically, that could end up working in favor of China in the sense that we say, look, we recognize we have two different systems here.
Mr. Secretary, a lot of rhetoric has been made that this is just the opening bid, right? So President Trump comes out hard, comes out swinging, and then it's just really a negotiation tactic. Can we call that negotiating tactic anymore, or has this actually evolved into something completely different?
Well, there are still tactics being played, and that's going to continue. But the tariffs on steel and aluminum, those are real. The investigation going on in autos, that's real. The tariffs that will come out on July 6th, that's real. And, I think the president has to be very careful on these tactics, because at some point, if he pushes forward and backs down, then he's going to lose credibility. The U.S. will lose credibility. So every move here is potentially treacherous. And we need to be very careful. But this thing has started, and it's going to expand beyond trade. It's going to go into the investment arena, where we can invest in China, where the Chinese can invest in the U.S. So this is not good for our economy or the world's economy.
So given that reality, Secretary Gutierrez, let's have you put on your other former hat as the CEO of a major global corporation. What do you do?
Well, right now, depending on the industry you're in, but what we're telling clients is, look, be patient as much as you can be. Don't panic. Don't make a strategic move if you don't have to. There may be some industries where they have to start moving around supply chains that have been built over years. But some industries where you can still wait it out, where you can still make some tactical decisions, but not make the big moves that will change the way you operate for the future. As was mentioned, some of these could be tactics. Things are changing every week. And this is not going to be permanent. So I think companies that can stick it out will have a benefit. But if you have to move now. But I would prefer a plan B and wait as long as possible.
So as a CEO, given everything that you just said, presumably you're looking at an economy that feels pretty good right now, especially in the United States. So if you are having to put off some of those strategic decisions and go to a plan B, does that threaten broader economic growth or even earnings growth at particular companies?
Yes. Yes, earnings growth will be impacted simply because raw materials are higher. The whole irony of this is that the imports that come in from China 60% of those are imported by U.S. multinationals or U.S. companies who use them as inputs so they can in turn export or have better prices for the domestic market. So we are essentially applying tariffs on U.S. companies. And that's going to backfire. It's going to hit U.S. earnings, it's going to hit U.S. employment, and importantly, it's going to drive inflation in the U.S.
There was a great article over the weekend talking basically semiconductor companies are now having to pay a tax on their own semiconductors. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to talk about a broader CapEx trend. If you come inside the Bloomberg, this is the sentiment index in different regions of the United States in terms of future capital investments over the next 6 months. And all you need to know is the right-hand side, which is they're all turning lower. What's the biggest hurdle you see right now that a CEO faces?
I would say uncertainty. And but if you look at some specifics and look at some substance, steel and aluminum have gone up in price. So if you're going to build a plant in the U.S., it's going to be more costly today than it would have been a year ago. That also hurts investment. So it is the uncertainty. As I said, what we're telling people, CEOs, is don't panic, wait, be patient. Well, that also applies to capital investment. People aren't making the investments they'd like to make until they find out how this is all going to shake out. So that is halting economic activity.
And so, I say this only half jokingly, I mean, imagine a scenario where the former CEO you is lobbying the former Commerce Secretary you. What is he saying to you?
Well, you know, Secretary Ross is a believer, as many people in the administration are. And of course, he has instructions from the president. He's there to serve the president, and he's doing his job. But there are folks who believe that this is the way to go. It's hard to imagine that rationally you can get here, but there are people like Robert Lighthizer, who was here in the 80s, and he thinks that all these trade agreements have been bad. The irony is that if you add up all of the trade agreements that we've done since Lighthizer was in the government, we have a surplus. 40% of our exports go to countries with whom we have a free trade agreement. The reality is we don't have a free trade agreement with China. So we just have to be careful, and this isn't a simplistic problem. It's not one-dimensional. And I think we're looking at it in a very one-dimensional way, and regrettably, it's going to backfire.